Excited to introduce everyone who is in this live session, really historic session, the titled Reimagining the Chariot, Feminine Perspective on the Bhagavad Gita. And this is actually, really first time that we could host this particular topic. Our Ambassador Gopi Onali, Deborah Sachs, Jean Heilman, Pranidhi Varshney, and Sarah Mata are all here as panelists, and Jacqueline Sonderling kindly accepted the role of moderator. Let me just, let's bring everyone, and I'd like to give a quick introduction of everyone. So Gopi Onali has taught yoga and meditation for 25 years at Morning Land Monastery, Long Beach, California, where she has found a connection to regenerative permaculture and deep ecology. She's a pujari, artist, herbalist, and loves chanting the Gita in Sanskrit. You could have been in the previous session too. Anyways, I met Gopi a long time ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when she emailed me to volunteer for an event, and that started one thing to another, and she helped our event in Los Angeles, and then we met at Loyola Marymount University yoga philosophy class. And she shared recently that maybe early this year that she has been working on this Bhagavad Gita for women, because there is not much female perspective and analysis and interpretation from women's perspective. It's like, oh my God, that's very interesting. I read so many of them and I still couldn't get really connected to it. And I was so curious, when are you going to publish this book? When are you going to publish this book? And then I thought, well, maybe at the gala, we can bring in all these powerful women we know from our community, and everybody agreed. So they're here. So Deborah Sachs, is in Grass Valley, California, runs Ashtanga Yoga studio herself. I met her years ago, probably at, I don't know, through internet or something, but met her in person at Ashtanga Yoga Conference. She's been immersed in the study and practice of all things yoga for the last 29 years. So she's also one of those very dedicated yoga students, yoga teachers. Thank you for joining us today. And Jean Heilman, who joined Yoga Gives Back Ambassador recently, but we've known each other for a long time at from the Center for Yoga in Larchmont in Los Angeles. That's where Yoga Gives Back was born in 2007. And Jean is the founder of Tantra Flow Yoga, brings over 36 years of yoga practice and the study to her teaching of asana, Ayurveda, and mindfulness, and working with energy. She has held a sincere relationship with the Bhagavad Gita and loves to share its gifts to students. So it's really perfect that you joined this panel today. And Pranidhi Varshney, hi, nice to see you, Pranidhi. It's been a while. She just had her second baby, so she's been a very busy mother and yoga teacher. She's back teaching Ashtanga at her Yoga Shala West in West Los Angeles, who survived COVID. Congratulations, and the community is back practicing. And she has been practicing, I don't know how many years, 20, 30 years. She met Manju Joyce early on her journey, and she continues to be, he continues to be her teacher and mentor. And I must admit, Pranidhi has created a wonderful community of students and practitioners at her Yoga Shala West. And now she has 2 children, so thank you for joining. And Sarah Mata, who also joins today, and I just read her bio and I was blown away. So I just share a little bit, but Sarah has studied or taught at Yoga Works since 1990 through 2010, and Eastland Institute from 2004 to 2008. And at Loyola Marymount University, she's been on the faculty from 2008 until the future. And she has studied with TKV Deskachar, 1989 to 2000, Patabi Joyce, 1989 to 2006, Srivatsa Ramaswamy from 2005. And Gopi Jacqueline, Sarah are all connected, and I also met Gopi there, but at Srivastava Ramaswamy, who teaches at Loyola Marymount every year. So thank you so much, Sarah, for bringing your decades of dedication in these studies to this panel. And finally, Jacqueline Sonderling, whom somehow we've studied some yoga philosophy years ago in my apartment. And Gopi connected us again. And she says her most influential two teachers were Arun Deva, whose daughter Anjali will be joining us later for the Ayurveda session, and Srivastava Ramaswamy. During her teacher training with Ramaswamiji, that she began studying the ancient yogic texts, first the Yoga Sutras, then the Bhagavad Gita, Samkhya Karika, and various Upanishads. And Jacqueline, I think you have some major production background too as a producer. So she is so organized and as a coordinator and moderator. So thank you so much, everyone. And I'm very excited to pass this on to Jacqueline for this first session.
Great, well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here, really exciting to be here with all these illustrious women, many of whom I can call friends and longtime friends. Gopi, I'm going to throw it to you to start. You've got a few things you wanted to begin with, so let's just go on to you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you to Kayoko and to Yoga Gives Back for making this opportunity to reimagine the chariot, to explore some of the feminine voices on the Bhagavad Gita, while saying thank you to India for the gift that they've given us in yoga. Let's see, can I get on my screen share? I have some slides to look at today. We'll see if that comes around. But I'll just continue. I'm Gopi Unali, as Kayoko said. I'm a disciple of Sri Tanato, and it's she who first introduced me to the Bhagavad Gita as the warrior's manual. I've since studied the traditional Sanskrit Gita, her theology and practice, and I think there's something to be said for always working to understand what is cultural and what is universal in the Gita. And here comes some slides. Today we're going to be reimagining the chariot, and it's with gratitude to all of my teachers, to Krishna, to the Bhagavad Gita, and to the Gita's home, India, that we come together today. I want to thank all of the ambassadors for Yoga Gives Back who have made such a wonderful gala already. To all of the yoga students and the compassionate souls who are here today, made time to be here with us. Thank you to my students whose questions and presence have brought forward many of the themes that we'll be discussing here today. I'll start the session with a short lecture, and later I'll be joined by these esteemed panelists, all of whom also teach the Bhagavad Gita. Our intention today is simple: to make the Bhagavad Gita more accessible to a wider audience in the yoga community, including everyone. I think this is the Gita's intention, and so it is ours. May the seeds of our collective action, which are grounded in gratitude, caring, and generosity, continue to benefit the world's welfare. What does this image bring to your mind? If you said war, domination, patriarchy, you're not alone. This is the image that's most commonly associated with the Bhagavad Gita. And honestly, many people, many yoga teachers and students have told me that it's kind of a deal breaker. This is the scene where we first meet the mighty warrior Arjuna, who's on the left. And it's his chariot that's being driven into battle, the battle of Kurukshetra, by Krishna, who's the blue one, India's Bronze Age Christ. This is one chapter in India's great epic, the Mahabharata, which is a war between family for the throne. And it's the kind of ideological battle that we well understand today. It's full of Bronze Age war and weaponry, bows and arrows, maces, elephants. But when we look at this image, we should read its meaning, its true meaning, which is a metaphor for overcoming life's battles. And that often in the midst of extremes like this, we are most open to the divine. Today, we're going to take a feminine approach to the Bhagavad Gita. I have this sense that the Gita is a meeting place, like the Bodhi trees of the Upanishads, where we can all meet to discuss important ideas like Dharma, reincarnation, God's role in the world, and our responsibility as yogis to preserve what's good. The Gita has inspired so many of history's greatest spiritual seekers, men and women. And I believe it tries to be flexible, to meet us where we are. Like Arjuna in his 11th hour crisis of conscience, the Gita's teachings can help us to navigate our complicated, messy struggles, not just personal shortcomings, but the challenge that our times present us. And ours today are significant. Reading the Gita connects us to a greater tradition. As modern yoga practitioners, we need this. This greater tradition is what Aldous Huxley called a perennial philosophy. We need its wisdom. We need its ethics today. This topic grew out of seeing the faces at the trainings that I've gone to. The Gita's new audience, the international, largely non-Hindu yoga community, which is made up of at least 80% women. I'm so inspired to see so many faces, so many of us learning the depth and the breadth of the yoga tradition. In my own struggles learning and later teaching the Gita, I found that some of the key ideas like Dharma, karma, moksha, the Atman, require time and creativity to really comprehend. In teaching the Gita, we have to faithfully represent the tradition while also making these ideas graspable to a completely new audience. I noticed my own tendency to follow that typical arc of the hero's myth, that the special person with a special job to do that is the only one who can save the world, to be inconsistent with the rest of the Gita. When we read the Gita as a whole, especially Krishna's ongoing counsel to get over yourself, I realized that there were better examples, archetypes that felt closer to the real meaning of the renunciation of action. The examples of belonging to others, of belonging to the earth, examples of caring, and the kind of work that we do to keep caring, even when nobody notices and when we face resistance. I don't think there's any one example that shows the renunciation of fruits of action, but we do need many examples to model a different way to be in the world. This kind of example provided to be more accessible to my students, who very often are taking care of others, of animals, of gardens, of yoga studios, that have people dependent upon them. And so we should also remember, like in this image, that Krishna loves women. And so many of the images that we see are with him, with women. But first, we have to decode the chariot. This image here, one of the classic images of the chariot, is not advocating war. It's about remembering who you really are. As many of you know, this image of the chariot is a metaphor for the principles of yoga philosophy. And on the left is a verse from the Katha Upanishad. Well, we don't have time to discuss the tattvas today in depth. And if it's new to you, you should look forward to that class. But we should talk about reinterpreting, or how we interpret this metaphor. I've noticed, and you might have too, that sometimes the sense of hierarchy or even domination comes through the interpretation of this image. Killing the ego, dominating the senses, fighting your nature. It all sounds outdated, even colonial. Let's reimagine this image as less of a solid structure or something that's greater than something else in a set of rankings, and more about an ongoing process of perception. Let's reimagine this as the process of how we know anything, of cognition, of consciousness. Let's reimagine this, the mind, as a living system, a network of faculties that are interdependent upon each other and interdependent on the surrounding world. No person is an island. The inner work of accepting our true nature is always the goal, while the work of focusing the mind and disciplining our self-centered habits benefit from a sense of kindness and care. The chariot is a metaphor for neuroscience. It teaches about the relationship with the Atman, the indwelling consciousness, the soul. And it provides a consistent language throughout the Gita. It deals with the senses, the brain, the nervous system. Speaks in terms of senses, sense objects, the eye maker, the wisdom faculty. And here we can imagine this as a network of constituents that make up the process of cognition. As we reimagine the chariot, let's consider cognition to be permeable rather than a rigid, set structure, and appreciate the deeper sense of interconnection it brings us. I think the connection to neuroscience is important, not only because it's fascinating, but because it's modern. Much of what we know about neuroscience, the workings of perception, we know from what's been learned in the last 20 years. Yet it proves many of the Gita's ancient teachings to be true. As we zoom out here on the battlefield, we see it populated by countless beings, warriors, horses, elephants, but no women. Where are the women? They're in the kitchen. They're keeping the children safe from all this violence. They're at the hospital waiting for injuries. Women are always there, but often not seen or heard in the recounting of history. This happens to be a particularly good example of that. This idea of Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre, which is the Gita's opening verse, represents a weaving of the personal and the political. Its metaphor is for the integration of the spiritual and the material in this interconnected plane of being that we call life, the engaged space of the world. The Gita speaks about action, about how we live, how we participate, how we show up. It says that Dharma and karma exist in the same space at the same time, and that the opportunity to do the right thing always exists. And while the Gita leads with this image, it doesn't stay there. Many of us know that as we come to know the depth and the richness of what the Gita has to offer, Krishna will make many innovations. What is Dharma? And I'm going to bring in some of Krishna's teachings, where he shows us that there's a better way to be in the world. And these translations are a combination from Barbara Stoller-Miller and Brenda and Georg Fierstein. And I have tried to make the pronouns neutral. When one disciplines the senses with the mind and engages in action, it's called karma yoga. Acting only with the action senses, detachment sets them apart. Action imprisons the world unless it's done as a sacrifice. Freed from attachment, perform action as sacrifice. Relinquishing attachment to action is one of the Gita's main teachings. Attachment to what? Results. This shows up as worry, expectation, anxiety, despair. Are you judgmental, critical? Krishna frees us from having to be the judge and jury on our own or anyone else's action. By making action a sacrifice, and sacrifice what? Worry, expectation, anxiety, despair. We should understand that this karma yoga is one of Krishna's theological innovations. What was once only available to monks who leave the world for a life of secluded contemplation is now adapted for householders, people who live in the world. By inviting ordinary people into practice, the Gita disrupted some of the caste and gender hierarchies of the day. Krishna gives these verses that define the motive, the sankalpa, or the why of self-transcendent action. Always perform with detachment any action you must do. Performing action with detachment, one achieves supreme good. Seeing the way to preserve the world, you should act. This principle, preserving the world, is loka sangraha, and it is the guiding ethic that Krishna gives us on Dharma. So as we're reimagining, let's zoom in on the chariot. And we can see here that it's a dialogue between friends. This illustrates the way that the knowledge of yoga has always been passed down between friends. Consider that space between us. Social distancing has given us a new appreciation for this type of togetherness. It's here in relationship where the mystical dimension of life makes itself aware. And this is an aspect of Krishna. This is where the transmission of spiritual insight takes place. And this dialogue on yoga has always been by men to men. Yes, you might know this, that outside of a very rare exception, the dialogue on these mystical insights has always been between men, one generation to the next, and so on, and so on, and so on. But we are interrupting this. We are the daughters of the international women's rights movements, of racial equality, civil rights, LGBTQ rights, of poor people's rights. We've done a lot of work to have everyone's voices included. Let's take the opportunities afforded to us by our mothers and our grandmothers to study the Gita and to live its activist message. This verse here is officially opening the way to everyone. No one devoted to me is ever lost. If they rely on me, women, commoners, men of low rank reach the highest way. No longer needing to rely on priesthood or patriarchy, Krishna here is the redeemer of outcasts, and he reminds us as modern women of our traditional roles in society. This is part of Krishna's bhakti yoga and is widely regarded to be the Gita's greatest triumph. Bhakti is one of Krishna's innovations, and he presents it as a new way of relating to God by offering our deeply personal emotions, things that are born out of everyday life. The Gita changed women's lives. It made space for a new expression of faith to emerge. Krishna invites us to love him as our friend, as a lover, as ultimate reality, or as a child. Bhakti redefined Dharma as universal, beyond caste, and helped women to find a way around some of the restrictive social roles that defined their everyday lives. The Stree Dharma, or women's Dharma, where women are defined only as wives and mothers, are not necessarily afforded an education, which is the cause that brings us here today, the education of girls. To receive anything more than the most basic spiritual teachings. You might have heard of this, that women often aren't allowed in the room when more advanced teachings are taking place. But fortunately, these stained glass ceilings are being shattered today. This is one of my favorite verses on puja. A leaf or flower or fruit or water that one offers with devotion, I accept in response to devotion. Whatever you do, whatever you take, whatever you offer, whatever you give, what penance you perform, do it as an offering to me. The feminine perspective is as varied as are women, but some things we can generalize. Women have traditionally been caregivers, mothers, feeders, responsible for the home. Although times and gender roles are changing, and not every woman chooses to be a mother, let's consider these roles as outlining a feminine perspective. As Dr. Eunice says, when a destitute mother starts earning an income, her dreams of success invariably center around her children. A woman's second priority is to the household, while men have an entirely different set of priorities. And it's nothing personal, guys. We're just bringing light to the feminine perspective. And I believe that we can all learn to think this way. In teaching how to put others before yourself, my guru often taught to think like a woman. And this is the golden rule, to treat others as you would like to be treated. Children are the inheritors of your actions, of my actions, and of everyone else in the world today. Caring either directly for children or about their welfare, as we're doing here today with Yoga Gives Back, in my opinion, shows that you get it. The Gita's big picture. It's a sign of spiritual maturity. By caring for others, we care for the future. So how can we act for the world's welfare? By caring for people, by creating networks to better take care of each other, by giving attention to the local, to the daily, by working to preserve our ideals, by taking care of the earth. The Gita teaches, do your best and leave the rest to Krishna. The operative word here is caring, and we all have an opportunity to care. Returning now to the chariot, and I think this is the picture of the actual battlefield of Kurukshetra. I hope we have reimagined its meaning to be something that will make the Gita more inclusive and accessible to everyone. This is a perfect time, this complex and messy world that we live in. It's so confusing. And it's a great time to reconsider the Gita and to let Krishna's song help us navigate the difficult decisions that we make in our everyday lives. Please, if you have any questions, I hope that you'll type them into the chat. We're going to be taking questions through our next part. And I put my email here if anyone ever needed to reach me. And I'd like to offer this last. This is where Krishna concludes the Gita. He says, "This knowledge that I've taught is more arcane than any mystery. Consider it completely, then act as you choose." I love that Krishna speaks to us as thinking people and gives us an opportunity to make good choices, respects our ability to choose the right thing. So I hope you found some insight in this lecture, but remember the Gita takes time. It takes time to unfold and time to get to know it. The way it takes time for a flower to open or to get to know a friend. And so we're going to widen the lens and bring in some of my friends. So wonderful to have here today. And I'm going to pass it back to Jacqueline Sonderling, my dear friend and a great supporter of the yoga teachings and the yoga vidya. Thanks for all your work, Jacqueline.
That was beautiful, Gopi. Thank you very much. Just beautiful. And it's also a perfect place for where we're going next. We divided the rest of our session into 4 discussions, each with a topic inspired by the Gita, and it's something that spoke to each of the women individually on the panel. So let's dive right into our first topic, which is Dharma Yoga. And the question, what is my purpose and how do I get out of my own way to find it? Navora, why don't you get us started?
There we go. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And thank you to, on behalf of everyone up here, I want to thank Kayoko and Yoga Gives Back. It's such an incredible organization. And it is the perfect example of heart-centered service. And that's really what Dharma is. At the center of Dharma is service, as Gopi just beautifully taught us, that caring is really at the center. And so we often hear Dharma spoken to about duty, right? Like, what is one's role in the world, and how do we go about doing it? And because of our culture, one's role tends to come with an expectation at the end. I'd like to widen the lens and bring in what the meaning, the verbal root, the Sanskrit word dharma, the verbal root Dhri means to sustain or to nourish. And what is more feminine than life-giving, life-sustaining? I mean, that is such at the center of what it is to be a woman. And if we are going to align ourselves with that which nourishes us, or that which is most sustaining, then we need to know ourselves. Yeah, and Krishna speaks to this concept of know thyself and the Jiva Atman, the soul's wisdom. So if we are to know ourselves, we have to enter into this process of self-inquiry. And, you know, Krishna talks about Svadharma being the dharma of one's personal dharma, and speaks to it with such significance, saying that to follow one's own personal dharma imperfectly is far superior than following another's dharma perfectly. So he's really speaking to the necessity, the essential necessity of self-inquiry. So how is it then? How do we get out of the way? As Jacqueline said, how is it that we get out of the way to know who we are so we can actually contact our own personal dharma, because that's how we can be most effective in the world. So I think that what this requires is a process of self-inquiry, and the process of self-inquiry is a quiet process. It's a little bit more of a feminine process, right? That we're not plotting masculine against feminine, but if we're talking about the more receptive qualities of the feminine principle, then we're talking about things like creating a space. Just the simple act of showing up and creating a space for the inquiry to happen, I think is really, really important. And if we're holding space, we have to have a sense of compassionate presence. And these are not always commonly found in our culture. Compassionate presence, deep listening. How is it that I can understand and tune into my soul's wisdom if I'm not able to fully listen, right? So deep listening requires us to get out of the way and allows that which is most authentic to us to come forward, right? So it's very much a process of listening, of getting out of the way of ego, getting out of the way of expectation. And in a culture of doing, when, who we are, what we do, how much we make, that is very valued. So it's really, I think, important to bring in this understanding that sometimes skillful action, which is how Krishna describes yoga. Yoga is skillful action. Then skillful action in this respect is quieter. It might take a little bit of time. It might be some of the qualities are a little less obvious to people. It might look like inaction, but really it is the process of deep inquiry so we fully know who we are. And once we know who we are, we can actually bring all of that to the world and create nourishment and create a sustainable way of living and being. And like Gopi said, to care. Dharma is really about caring. So by dropping into a sense of self-inquiry and understanding who we are, we can be of great service to the world.
Great. Beautiful, beautiful way of looking at it. Let's open up the discussion now to everyone on the panel. Ladies, what else would anybody like to add something here? Sarah, or Jean, okay, I'm gonna call on you then to go ahead and add your two
I
cents.
just unmuted just to be ready. I don't know, Devorah, you said it so well. The one thing when I talk to students, either about the Gita or anything in this world, Dharma, everyone's like, well, what's my, the journey is, what is our Dharma? And it's not always our job, which is something that you explained. It's not necessarily our career. For some people, one's Dharma is to be a mother. And in our modern progressive society, it's like, that's not something to be embarrassed about, because we need a better, we want a new generation with positive morals and things like that. So it's not always what is our job. And I just wanted to add that for topic and discussion.
Do you ladies think that in the culture that we live in today, where it's so much about what you do, what you have, that it's harder to find your authentic Dharma?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll be quiet after this, just what Devorah was saying, it's very hard to listen. And we're so tuned into everything going on, but the listening, which is a feminine quality, and everyone has masculine and feminine. So every person is welcome and invited to this whole discussion, but it's the ability to stop the active mind and to go into the receptive. It's hard. That's what I would offer.
Sarah, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Jean. I wanted to echo what Jean said about the idea of Dharma as your job is important to dispel, because many people don't find this deep truth in their job that they get paid for. But you also made reference, Deborah, to the idea of seeing. There's in the 4th chapter, the 18th verse, the idea of seeing in action, in the midst of action, to see stillness, and in stillness to see action, which if you are, let's say, a mother, when you're caring for a child, you want to hold them still while they fuss and cry and wail and kick. And then finally they calm and you soothe them. But even in terms of the stopping of the, kind of distractions from our purpose, I think it's important to look at the situation on the battlefield is that they're on this high stakes moment and everything stops. The battle stops. You can't get to this material until you can slow down. And I think a lot of us come to yoga because it gives us a place to go slow down. we have made an investment in a little bit of time that we're going to go slow down, which if you can't stop, at least you can slow down. But I liked the way you said, also framing it, getting out of your way, because that's like a real, an art, what is in the way, our hurry, our anxiety, our rush, our thinking that this isn't enough what we're doing.
And what you said, Sarah, about in the midst of this high stakes deal, it stops. So Krishna is holding space for Arjuna, right? That there is this deep listening. There is, let's make space for that authentic unfolding. So it is right there in the Gita, right? Like right from the start, which I think is a really important understanding.
Yeah.
You know what? That's an absolutely perfect place to move on to our next topic, which is embodying the Gita, taking yoga off the mat. What are the lessons and skills in the Gita that we can take off the mat and into our daily life? And so, Sarah, let's continue that with you.
Yes, well, I'll echo as well in the concept of Dharma and the root that Deborah spoke about. It's operating on many levels. Part of what's kind of difficult at first with the Gita is that it's not the way we normally think. We do normally think about our job, or we think about the hustle and bustle of our day. But the Dharma operates on levels that are, evolutionary. They're not even in the scheme of our own lives. We look towards order, that if you care about the world, you'll care about the climate situation, because, well, we might not be here, but our grandchildren will be here. And that way in which we hold Dharma by being aware of what we can do, that sense of caring, as Gopi said, at the notion of a relational awareness instead of power over the earth or power over our whatever intended market is, to be engaged with. But embodying the Gita, I think many of us come to yoga practice because, I know I did, to be in the body is a way to get in touch with what's real for you. Like the saying, the issues are in your tissues. Many levels of reality we aren't conscious of, especially, when you're young, so much is going on. And that sense of the level of this discussion, when you just take one beautiful little compound, it's the compound that's the field and the knower of the field, or Kshetre. We've already talked about Kshetre and the Jana, the knower of the field. So the field is basically us, our examples, our passions, our loves, our hatreds, our grievances, all of the human situations that we all live out. That's the field. It's not just, can I do a headstand or a certain pose? And the knower is always right there. The knower is there quietly, silently, often not recognized. And the knower is part of our spiritual nature, which we can pretty much assume that this text is reminding us as yoga students that it's a spiritual process. The process of knowing is to come to your sense of reality from a very different perspective, not bound in the ego of I this, me this, mine that Gopi referred to in neuroscience, we all know is now being seen as, if you wanted to pinpoint the ego in the body, that would be the structure, the default mode network that would account for how we are all locked in. We're hardwired to be concerned in that way, instead of this way that I think as women, we actually can lift out of, because sort of we have to. Even if you have just like any family at all, or a pet, you know that it's not about you, and you care, you're regular and steady in that way. So I could go on and on, but I'm not sure if I take all the time.
Well, let's open it up to the rest of the group and anything that anybody would like to add or throw in here.
I think where Sarah just left us in the regularity, the steadiness, and what yoga practice gives to us. It gives us the tools to understand the way the body mind works together, the tools to, address these battlefield situations and in order to cultivate that sense of stillness and quiet, we turn to the yoga tradition, to the limbs of Raja Yoga to define our ethics, our sense of inner discipline, asana to regulate the chaotic nervous system that in our world today is being overloaded all the time. And there's no one in the world that's experienced what we're experiencing with the devices and the technology and the competition for our attention. I think never has it been more important that we are able to turn to practice as a source of strength and stillness.
We have a question here from a participant that takes us back a little bit, but I'd like to throw this out. The question is, could you talk a little about the relationship between Dharma and trust in women? It's very interesting. Yeah. Anybody have some ideas on that they'd like to share?
Just kind of piggybacking on what I said, and Sarah as well, that if yoga is a practice of embodiment, and to be able to really go inside the body and understand how thoughts, how feelings, how sensations, how emotions live in our body, to the ability for us to identify what is arising in us, I think develops deep trust, right? If I'm able to name what's here and have an intimate experience with my body, then I can be in deep trust with myself and with my relationships.
I like that.
Interesting. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Sarah?
Yeah, and I think this shift that Gopi brought out in her just brilliant summary of the Gita, when we look at it from a feminine perspective, it is to understand things collectively, to work with each other, to feel our collective moment in time instead of this isolated individual. I think that idea of the warrior why is it outdated? Because it's isolated. And yet, although Krishna is right there, Krishna is right next to him, he can touch him, so I think it's sort of implied, but the idea of trust in coming together, and allowing yourself to be with other people in this collective endeavor, which I think we have to do to basically save our planet.
I think that leads us really, really well into our next topic. As we've already said, as Gopi, you pointed out, we don't generally think of women and especially motherhood and the Gita. And we've talked about Praniti, who is now a mother for the second time and has drawn some interesting comparisons in her life and for her life between the Gita and motherhood. Perhaps you'd like to share some of that with us now.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I have a little something prepared to share, but as I've been listening to all of you speak, a couple of stories have come to my mind, and I'll share them, particularly because I'm like swimming in baby and toddlerhood. I have a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old. So it's pretty full on right now. And I had a couple things, my daughter who's 3, I feel like sometimes she has more wisdom than any yoga teacher that I've ever met. Because, these little kids, those of you who are mothers will know, like they're tuned in, they're tapped into something that we've sort of trained ourselves out of as we get older. And perhaps the practice of yoga is a little bit about returning to that wisdom that lives in us, from childhood. But she was watching a little, one of her favorite TV shows, and they were talking about all the different jobs that we can do, all the different jobs and how all the jobs are important. No matter what your job, it's really, really important. And so we were in the bath that night, and she says something, oh, mama, something, something, something. What do you do all day? And I said, well, I'm your mama. That's my job. She said, that's not a job. I said, Debbie, what do you think I do all day? I'm working, I'm taking care of you, I'm doing all these things. She said, okay. She just kind of, let that go. And it just so happened that a couple of days after that, she was off school, and I took her to the yoga shala with me. And so at the yoga shala, she's watching me. She calls me over. She says, Mama, when are you going to start your work? I said, Debbie, I am working. This is my work. She said, that's not work. And it was so funny. Everybody in the shala laughed. But it's so funny, like in the span of a couple of days, she told me neither is mothering work, nor is my teaching yoga work. And it just had me thinking, like, so what is work? Like, what are these identities that we wrap ourselves around, mother, yoga teacher, career, whatever it might be for you. And perhaps dharma, which is the theme that we've been talking about, is a way of being rather than any specific thing that we do, whether it's teaching yoga or taking care of children or going to the law firm or whatever it is. Like, perhaps dharma is a way of being. So I hope that resonates with some of you. And then there's just one other thing I wanted to talk about, which really became clear to me when I was parenting for the first time, parenting a young baby specifically, is that we've talked about, Gopi, you talked about so beautifully, karma phala tyaga, the renunciation of the fruits of our actions, right? I grew up in a Hindu environment, going to Hindu school, and this was always talked about: renunciation, non-attachment. We talk about this in yoga philosophy a lot, non-attachment. And I never understood it. It never really resonated with me, because I thought, oh, non-attachment is like removing from the world, like you said, going to live in a monastery and kind of just, being, I felt a sense of remove whenever I would hear those concepts talked about. And when I started becoming the parent of a baby specifically, the flip happened where I realized, oh my gosh, karma phala tyaga is not renunciation, it's not being removed, because when you're parenting a baby, the most important thing you can do for that baby is to build a strong and secure attachment for that baby to its mother, to its father, to its siblings, to its larger family, to its community. That baby needs to feel strongly and securely attached. And so this is the feminine perspective that I think often gets lost when we're talking about renunciation, non-attachment. We're forgetting the flip side, which is that actually the attachments need to be strong. That trust you were talking about, Sarah, it needs to be really strong and intact, because once that's intact, we can let go of the fruits of our actions. But we have to feel first connected and trustful and attached in our tribe.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Wonderful way to look at it. Wonderful way. I know that we have at least two other mothers and a grandmother on the panel. Sarah, Gopi, would you like to say anything, add anything to the discussion?
Yes. You want to call who's who?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would like to, first of all, just say, Praniti, that's I love the notion of the essence of it is being. And when you're with children, it is about being with them. Even though my daughter will be 43 on Monday, when they come to visit with my grandchildren, if you make a plan, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. It's not going to happen. The whole thing is you want to be with them. And there's that sort of thing that I think most people know about, giving your children roots, as you were saying, attachment and wings. And the detachment is partly that. And the trust is not just people, but you actually start to trust life, which is, I think, what Krishna is trying to say to us: trust life, trust I am everywhere. And it's scary. I remember watching my daughter go across the playground as first grader. And I was terrified, then going across the country to school, then getting on an airplane for her year abroad. And now the grandchildren, they're actually not teeny, they're big. And they're, taking buses to sporting events, and they live in New York. And it's a lot of detachment in action right there. But I also think you just have a perspective in time as you just get older. You feel, you start to understand this twofold reality, that there's the reality of the time bound. You've seen your daughter, you've seen your children grow from those babies that they still are into women, and then their babies that look so, have curious little ways that they are like your family. And that way of seeing reality, that it's happening, we are changing, we are growing, and yet there is something kind of invested in a future for our children that becomes, I think, much more clear. First of all, your own time horizon, you kind of get it. Time's almost up. Time's almost up. It's a different time frame, different time horizon. But yeah, that's incredible. And I think also with being a grandmother, the idea of you know, you're not on the line in the same way when you're a mother. When you're a mother, you really are on the line. I get to do fun stuff. So, but yeah.
So many important points, Sarah. And that perspective of the daily work. And before I say anything more, congratulations, Pranati, on your baby. What a blessing to the world. And I think it is such a blessing to be a mother. It's the hardest work I've ever done, and I consider it to be my primary sadhana. You know, and it's taught me so much about just what you're saying, how to be engaged, you know, how to be attached, how to hold firmly, but also hold lightly. I have thought so often throughout, my son's grown now too. And, you know, I thought often about that old passage from the prophet that says, your children are not your children. They belong to the future. And this is a place where you can't go. I think raising children to be good people and to allow them to grow into their own sense of self, you know, without coloring that with your own expectations of the way they're going to be is such a struggle. And it brings you very forefront with your own thoughts. For me, it always kind of made it real that, you know, while you have to provide that stability at all times, you've got to always know that there's one person that you can call who will always have your back. But you also have to hold lightly and let them be themselves and not try to be a carbon copy of who you are, a little mini me. And that's not easy. I think that gives us a really good metaphor for understanding what Krishna is teaching us and how to live in the world without and enjoy everything and observe everything and be a part of everything. But don't hold it so tightly. Don't cling to it. Don't grasp it. Don't cherish it to the degree that you take the life out of it. And so I think motherhood's taught a lot and continues to teach in so many ways.
Perfect jumping off spot for our last question, our last topic, which is bhakti yoga. We're sometimes overwhelmed by the hardships and the negativity that we see around us every day. So how do we open ourselves up and find the strength and compassion to overcome those things? Jean, your thoughts? Why don't you start us off there?
Sure. Thank you, Jacqueline. So in talking about bhakti yoga, and Gopi started to set things up with her wonderful introduction, when we were talking and preparing, a couple of people had mentioned some things about bhakti yoga, and I'm a nerd. So I had to do some research to, first of all, what is bhakti yoga before we start to just, you know, whatever. And so bhakti yoga comes from the root word bhaj, B-H-A-J, for anyone who is geeking out about this stuff. And it means to share, to possess, to participate in. It has all kinds of other meanings. These are the main things that I pulled. And it's actually, you know, of the different types of yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, raja yoga, tantra yoga, kriya yoga, bhakti is, so it's one of these types, and it's where you actually have a relationship with the divine. And other types of yoga may not, some do, but not to the degree of this. And the purpose that of bhakti yoga is to cultivate basically a connection or a relation, and I'm looking at notes because I'm not brilliant, a relationship with the divine. Why? To shrink our ego, which has already been discussed earlier. The purpose is to break down our sense of I, me, mine, because that's going to get us to our heart where the divine dwells. And the perspective is that confusion and unhappiness results when we're separate from this essence within our heart. And that's kind of almost every day. So there are a lot, as Gopi's already indicated, while the Gita has a whole section on karma yoga and it has a section on jnana yoga. So it really covers 4 and Raja yoga. He really he starts to really at the latter half just hit bhakti, bhakti, bhakti. And so I'm pulling out a few verses, and in case anyone has a scripture with you, it's hard to remember or hear. So verse 255 says, they live in wisdom who see themselves in all and all in them. So without intellectualizing, it's like just pause a moment. Like everybody on the screen, I mean, maybe we like each other. Okay, let's look at the news. Let's look at our neighbors. Can you see yourself in every single coworker and neighbor? It's like, well, that's really hard. It's like, yeah, that's why in some ways, bhakti yoga is the hardest yoga. And so then verse 630, and just to help people in case, hearing doesn't work for you. He says, I love this verse. He says, I am ever present to those who've realized me in every creature. So and he says other things, but just pause a moment. It's like there's a cockroach. And what do? We go, oh, gross. It's like Krishna is saying he's in the cockroach. And, it's not even, he said every creature, not even just human beings. So the bugs we don't like, the animals that we don't like, the living aspect, the mold growing on your bread, that's kind of living. And then we can go to, here we are getting ready for the holidays, the difficult family member. And so what do we want to do? But we want to shut them out and create separation. And already that's been discussed as well. And what it's asking us to do is to see the divine in the difficult family member, in the frustrating coworker. And then once you can do that, now look at the newspaper and look at the bothersome politician who's frustrating you. So he's saying that, and then he says, see, all life is my manifestation. It's like that means even the awful things that are happening on the planet. And you're like, well, how would God do that? Why would, it's like, it's not for us to understand, but it's to see the beauty. And then Gopi already mentioned about chapter 9, verse 26, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous section. And he says, again, whatever I'm offered, offer it with a pure heart. And he's like, even a leaf, you're like, not even a bouquet of flowers. And then one of the things that he says is, whatever you do, make it an offering to me. The food you eat, the sacrifices you're making. So everybody, motherhood is a sacrifice. Just sitting here, if any of us have achy bodies or anything, or parting with a little bit of money to support Yoga Gives Back is a sacrifice. That do it as an offering to me. That's where we start to actually live, embody the Gita. That's where this is like we're living the yoga. Pick up what Sarah was starting out off the mat. And I know my time's getting tight. So chapter 9, verse 26. One other verse if I can. He says, this is the thing he keeps saying. Fill your mind with me. Love me. Serve me. Worship me in all ways. Throughout the whole Gita, he's hinting about who he really is. And yes, he's saying, surrender the fruits of your work. How? Think of me. And when we cannot see the divine in others until we do the practice, which he asks in chapter 6, which is to meditate, to see the divine within ourselves. And then I'll end There's so many verses. I pulled out a bunch, but I'm gonna, I get excited. 1861. Can you see that? Yep. And he just says, the Lord dwells in the heart of all creatures. And this is where, if we start to do this and start to see the divine in our hearts, and that's how we can start to see the divine in others, even the most annoying of politicians, even the ones who don't believe in your philosophy and morality. When we can start to see ourselves in them, to see the divine in them, this is so hard. Love is hard. Hate is contagious. Love is hard. It's the hardest. And as one of you said, I think it was Gopi, caring is hard. This is a spirit, it's the warrior's path. It's a spiritual warrior who chooses kindness and love over the easy go-to of getting angry and shutting someone out of our life. And this is a feminine attribute that all of us can apply. And this, I think, it's one of the main messages. And so the masculine of the images that we saw that Gopi wondrously shared about kill, kill, be mean, it's like, oh, no, it's all an allegory. But if you have the patience, it's there. There's much more richer things. And I'm open for any other comments and questions, because there are so many verses I didn't mention.
It's wonderful. And I love your visual aids, Jean. I love them. They're great. They're wonderful.
In case anyone has a scripture and they want to, oh, which one was that?
Which one was it? That's beautiful. I love it. So we have just about 5 minutes left. So anybody who has some thoughts on the amazing things that Jean just shared with us, or some thoughts in general on the Gita that you'd like to people to take away with, or that resonate soundly with you, let's take our last few minutes and discuss that.
I'd like to share something that when I was listening to you, Jean, I was reminded of, some of you might be familiar with the practice of metta meditation, a loving kindness meditation, which is very similar, I think, to Bhakti Yoga, what you were speaking about. I was talking to my husband, and he's saying a teacher of his, metta meditation teacher, said, when you are you struggling with metta, when you can't muster that loving kindness for somebody, think about a baby. Think about a baby and the way that you would love that baby. Now, we actually have a baby. And the thing is with the baby, yes, there are moments when you are, just so in love with that baby. And then there are moments when you want to throw that baby out the window. But the real insight is that when that baby is screaming and crying and you cannot figure out what's going on, that baby is trying to communicate to you that he or she is struggling. It's suffering. Right. So when we are really, the insight for me was, okay, when I'm really having a hard time tapping into the bhakti or the metta, the loving kindness, the love, the compassion, can I see that person, perhaps not even as a baby who is just worthy of all my adoration, but as a baby who is suffering and struggling so much that all they can do is scream and cry and try to get my attention. You know? And then can I remember that and then act from a place of love?
That's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. Yes. It's hard.
It's hard. Yeah. Love is hard. You said it, Jean. Love is hard.
Freaking hard.
It's challenging, and it brings up a struggle to do that. It brings up our own sense of demanding things to be our way. And Bhakti Yoga says you've got to get over that. You've got to put it aside. There's a wonderful truth in the Buddhist tradition, is that to see that every living being has been your mother. And I think that's such a practical application of bhakti, because bhakti asks us to do the work of making it real, to not just, everybody's wonderful, I love you all, but we're people who are facing a tremendous struggle in racial equality, and everybody in our country is not treated the same.
Right.
And so we might have the tendency to say everybody's the same. And it's one of the questions I get a lot on the Gita. Are all people the same in this just absoluteness of the Atman. And the truth is, of course, yes, it is. But when we practice, we have to learn to be sensitive and accepting and generous and caring to the reality of life. And this is something that motherhood kind of, gets you oriented that you can still love and still want to throw them out the window.
And I think, Arjuna, and when we struggle, because the Bhagavad Gita really is a scripture about how to be a yogi for the householder. So when we struggle and you're like, I love my child, but I hate my child right now, or I don't like my life right now, whatever. That what's so cool is that Arjuna does not get it. It takes about 16 and a half chapters. And Krishna is the most patient. I always say this is the best teacher training manual ever, because Krishna never loses it with him. And Arjuna keeps coming up with, yeah, but what about this? What about this? And it's like, we will struggle. And the main thing is manage your mind. It's like, do your dharma. Yes. What is our dharma? Okay. And all of us have a dharma to do our practice. And then in a practice, we're like, I can't meditate because my mind is crazy. Work with your mind, just show up, and every day is going to be different. And that's where we can find the love and the patience and ask for help when we're really stuck, because he's there.
Thank you, Jean. I think that's a wonderful place for us to end this session. Gopi, I'm going to throw it back to you for literally the last minute to see if there's anything that you'd like to wrap up with and any final words.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here today and hope that we can help Yoga Gives Back and help the recipients of these scholarships. I hope everyone's been watching the documentaries that Kayoko made and meeting some of these fantastic children. Some of these girls are so inspiring to me, and I'm so happy to be helping them. I know this topic we hope to continue, so I stay tuned to Yoga Gives Back and more dialogues on the Feminine Gita. Thank you, and thank you to all my friends here. Thank you, Kayoko.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. It was a wonderful session, and as Gopi said, we'd love to continue this discussion. And we'll put this whole session into replay till the end of the year so everybody can listen in. It was just very interesting to hear how everybody's life is teaching Gita or reminding them from different perspective. And that's been so wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a huge honor. Thank you all.